guides and angels on our right, guides and angels on our left, guides and angels in front, and guides and angels in back to balance and harmonize our time here, leaving us in the light and allowing nothing but the highest, truest, or the best to manifest upon us now. Hi, friends. It is Wednesday, and you are with me on Cosmically Connected on the Forbidden Knowledge Network. I am your spiritual advisor and psychic medium. And tonight, I am so thrilled and so excited to introduce my dear friend. And by the way, she needs no introduction, Chaz Ebert. Chaz, thank you so much for being here with us.
Courtney, I'm really happy to be here with you today.
It's such a pleasure. I'm telling you that I have grown up, first of all, watching Siskel and Ebert, but and my father, I remember walking in as a child and it being on the TV and sitting there with him on the bed watching and listening, and he was very into it. And so to have you here on this podcast, and not just because of that, but because of the work that you're putting out into the world today, and also this amazing book that you've just written, I'm so grateful to be able to share it with you all, my community today. And so, Chaz, thank you for showing up in this world and showing up in this life as you.
Thank you, Courtney. You know, I am so happy to be able to share It's Time to Give a FECK, elevating humanity through forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness, because I sincerely believe that I was kind of led to do some of this work, and this is some of my mission here. So.
Thank you. Well, we're going to jump into that. And guys, you heard the name of that book correctly. It's Time to Give a FECK. And it is, yes, FECK, which is incredible, by the way. I love this book. And I've been, touched by reading this book and this information, this message. It's so important that the world get this in their hands. And so I encourage all of you guys watching tonight, go purchase this book, whether you're purchasing the virtual or digital copy or the weighted papered book. Go purchase this book. So, okay, Chaz Ebert is the CEO of Ebert Digital LLC, publisher of the preeminent movie review site RogerEbert.com, also legal advisor and TV and movie producer at Ebert Productions for 24 years. She shared a life with Pulitzer Prize-winner Roger Ebert in their work to foster empathy through cinema. They established the Ebertfest Film Festival and the Roger Ebert Center for Film Studies at the University of Illinois. Chaz has passionately continued to lead all events while nurturing film critics, filmmakers, and technologists through the Roger Ebert Fellowship. She awards the Golden Thumb and Ebert Humanitarian Awards to filmmakers who exhibit an unusual, compassionate view of the world. Chaz, you've got so many accomplishments, and I could go on with all of the different organizations that you've been involved with, all of the awards that you've also been given, and connections that you've made through your life's work. How does this book measure with everything that you've already accomplished in this life of yours?
So I think that all of the things, all the awards or accomplishments don't mean a thing if we are not kind and compassionate to each other. I think that the work that I've done previously and the work that I'm doing now has helped to actually engender and strengthen the empathy that I have towards other people. And so in that sense, I feel fortunate for having lived the life that I led. It doesn't mean that my life was always easy. There were, I've had, just like everybody else, I've had ups and downs in my life. And actually the ups and downs make you more compassionate because it opens your heart and opens your mind and opens your sense of compassion to what other people, to suffering or challenges that other people may be facing.
I believe that, well, first of all, you say that, and immediately, the world needs this right now more than ever.
Yes.
And so do you believe that you are being called to write this book from not just your having this human experience here on earth, but also from this maybe spiritual and soulful connected with your own highest self? Do you feel as though this was a spiritual project for you too? Not just, you know, I see that the world needs this, and I'm wanting to put that into effect.
Okay, excuse me.
Uh-huh.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, I do. The answer to that is yes. And the reason that I say yes is because, Courtney, I didn't sit down one day and say, oh, I'm going to write a book about compassion and kindness and empathy and forgiveness. To tell you the truth, you know, I have talked about a little bit about how this book came to be, but
Mm.
it's not the whole story because it was not an intentional, I want to sit down and because at the time that I began writing the book, I didn't think that I was the person to bring this into the world. I didn't feel that, oh, I'm the teacher, I'm the guru, no, it was none of that. And so during certain parts, certain chapters and segments of the book were written separately as I was led to write them. And I use the word led because sometimes I would get up and not know why I would sit down and write some of the words that I was writing or some of the examples that I used. And it's only later that it kind of became more clear to me. And the book was actually almost finished before the pandemic. After the pandemic, I sat down and looked at the book again and I said, this is not the message that I want to give to the world. I want to give something not out of fear-based, but leading from the heart, leading from empathy. And I think that what I wrote during the pandemic was more fear-based because that's kind of where some of us were when we didn't know what was going to happen, how long, how many people would die from the coronavirus, how long would it last, how long would um, shops or places to work be closed down? How long would schools be closed down? When would kids be able to socialize with each other? When would our level of anxiety decrease? And so that's more from a fear-based
Mhm.
uh, level. And I didn't want to do that. So I actually rewrote a large part of the book afterwards.
Wow, and what's interesting to me is you say that, and what I also hear, and let me know if this is not correct, but it sounds to me like it was, you know, it was on purpose before you were guided to write that before, and it was probably meant to have even some of that fear within it, and then for you to even see that that's not serving you today, the world today, and so
Yeah,
the evolution of that is so beautiful. You say that, and it starts to feel almost even emotional as um, as you were speaking your truth right there. Do you feel like this has been an emotional ride or a journey in finding, you know, the acronyms in this book, that forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness, because that's really where the FECK comes from, is those separate
absolutely.
words.
And I'm glad that you said it's an acronym so that people didn't think I was trying to be cutesy and make it sound like the other F word. My F word, FECK, actually stands for love because it's forgiveness, empathy, compassion, and kindness. And really, at the bottom of it all is kind of a love and respect and a unity. My book is more to bring people together. And yes, I felt that it's still hard for me to, except for the E in FECK stands for empathy or Ebert, as I say, because it was my late husband, Roger Ebert, who said that movies are a machine that generates empathy, that allows us to put ourselves in the shoes of another person. We're watching on screen for 2 hours, somebody whose background is different from ours, someone could be of a different gender, a different race, a different age, a different religion or socioeconomic status. And we look and see and vicariously live their life for that 2 hours that we're sitting in a movie theater. And we come up with a different understanding of what it is to be someone different from us, and to respect those differences. It doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but just kind of respect those differences, to be curious about the lives that someone else is leading, to be curious about their challenges, and maybe to develop compassion to help want to alleviate some of their pain and suffering.
You bring up, I can't stop smiling because listen, when we're in the flow of spirit or the energy of, there's such a, we're all one. And essentially that's also what I hear you saying is when we put ourselves in the shoes of somebody else, that we realize there's really not a lot of difference. There's something that I actually highlighted, and it's exactly to the point that you just brought up. And I want to share this out of the book. It says, I usually lean toward movies and good storytelling that humanizes our experiences. Neuroscience studies even support that when we see a movie with car chases, explosions, and people being unkind to or killing one another, we are more likely to experience road rage on our way home. Personally, I've noticed that I am apt to drive faster, listen to music and music with the volume turned up, and talk louder in the moments following such films. And so it was so interesting to read that, because all I kept hearing was that, from the world of spirituality, whatever we're reading, whatever we're watching, whatever we're listening to, I do believe that we're really all sponges in a way, energetically. And we are we're soaking up these things we're watching and all of that. And so I felt like you really described that perfectly. So when we're watching whatever, I know there's movies out there where they're driving the cars really fast or whatever.
Yes.
Think of the mainstream movies that do that. But you're saying you leave that moment wanting, kind of not even consciously being aware that that's what you're
But
doing, but
we're ramped up to do it, yes.
ramped up to do it. So let's go back
And
into
I'm
it.
not going to, and I'm not, and for sure, I'm not saying there's a direct correlation. For instance, if we watch a movie about a serial killer, doesn't mean we're going to become a serial killer.
Right.
But what I'm saying is we do, just like you said, we're sponge, we're taking in, what is it that we're taking in? What is it that our senses are responding to? And when our senses are seeing things or hearing things or surrounded by goodness or kindness, we're more apt to respond with goodness and kindness.
Don't you think that it can be that simple as well? But it doesn't have to be too difficult. I mean, forgiveness, empathy, compassion, kindness. Those
Yeah.
words have been around for so long. And I remember even in my development, my ex-husband, I remember I was having this, what felt like an aha spiritual moment. And we were having this conversation about, compassion in the world. And I kept saying, goodness is, and I couldn't quite find the word. And I said, goodness is good. And I'll never forget, he looked at me and just started laughing, because that's so ridiculous, Courtney, is essentially what he was thinking. I thought, no, that's my heart. It's that simple.
Oh, simple. Goodness is good. Goodness is good. And
Forgiveness.
there's a movie called Breaking the Waves. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a movie that some of it, the movie is kind of harsh, but at the end, this woman who is, you don't know during the course of the movie whether she's really hearing and talking to God, or whether it's an illusion on her part. And something happens, and she loses her life in this movie. But at an inquiry, they're asking her husband, do you think that how would you describe her? And, was she really talking to God? Was she not? And he just says, I have one word to describe her. She was, and he's thinking and choking on it. He just said, she was good. And by the time he says that in the movie, it really hits you really hard, because you do see that she was good, and that's a good, simple way. He didn't have to do a long description, and everybody in that court hearing also gets it. because she was good. And sometimes goodness is just good.
It's just good. I should write a book and just have that be the title.
Yeah.
Just it can be that simple. Well, you share that, and I immediately got chills down my legs. I'm sure everybody else listening, when you were just explaining that, when we have also a emotional response to the images on film or in the music or even in conversation, that is also, there's a mirrored energy exchange there that is that empathy.
Yes, the mirrored, yes, and I talk about that in the book. You know, they talk about the limbic system and mirroring neurons that we have actually in our brain. And you do even, and you find that even when you're with someone who's new, you find yourself when you're first talking face to face, maybe you would even pick up a glass to drink at the same time, or you find yourself crossing a leg or sitting or doing things just to mirror the other person subconsciously or even not unconsciously, because it's something that you do to just, it's a bonding thing. So
I agree with you. I've also heard, even the example of when one yawns, if you're with somebody and the other person yawns, and it's a very natural thing. I'm like, don't even want to talk about it because we're
yes,
yawning fest here. But when we're with people and we yawn or they yawn, and then that natural energy on the other end, it's a very common thing. I know we've
yeah,
all experienced it
yeah,
where we mirror that same thing. And it very often it's because we have that empathy. And it also means, I've heard, who knows who said this, but that it's because we care, because there's a caring energy there between the
and
two.
we're wired. Most people come into this world wired for empathy, and it's something that we can develop and strengthen as we get older. I say that empathy is like a muscle, goodness and kindness like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And the people who are not wired for empathy are usually kind of psychopaths or someone who has some neurological or psychological or biological reason that they can't sense the caring about other people. Yeah.
There's
So
like there's a break there. Well, we're talking so much about empathy, and before I'm sure we're going to bridge into all of these different topics, right? And that, to me, empathy is such a huge part of our lives, right? But you speak about that being also Roger's kind of message right up till his last breath is about
yes,
empathy, right?
he
So
felt that he was so fortunate to be a film critic and to see, because he says we're born in a certain package. We are who we are, where we were born, but to get outside of that is when you start looking at being curious about other people. And one of the ways to do that is through empathy and through movies or through lived experiences.
I'm a firm believer that, I connect with people in their energy here in the now, and then also their loved ones on the other side. And I'm a firm believer, and I always say that who knows until we're there, truly how that energy is. But how it feels to me is if we can evolve into that space that you're speaking of right now, where we feel for the other, and not just even the other, but we also have that third party perspective and empathy for even ourselves too.
Yes,
That is
absolutely.
true, consciousness here on earth. And I believe that when we've passed on the other side, we get that ability to have that brilliance where we feel it from everybody's perspective. And I think that the reason it's so important that we evolve and we read books as like yours is to help us understand and have that aha moment and that brilliance of consciousness here on earth before we wait on the other side to have that third party perspective of empathy, forgiveness, compassion, and kindness. And so thank you for putting that out. I don't want to jump.
I wanted to say one thing, and this is toward the end of my husband's life, when he was very sick, and I would get called upon to speak at different places. I had a speech called Sometimes Hope is a Strategy. And I would give this speech at like cancer centers or at hospitals or women's shelters. And excuse me. And at the end of that speech, people would stand in line and to talk to me, but also what people wanted more than anything was like a hug. So I would hug people, we would talk to each other, and I I just became so open. I don't know how to describe it, Courtney. You probably can help me find the words because I've been trying to find the word that I was just so open and people could sense how open I was. I don't know whether the universe opened me or whether I was so empathetic toward my husband when he was sick that my heart just broke right open and it opened everything. And people could sense it because they wanted to be near me. They wanted to touch me. They wanted to tell me stories. They wanted to, and they knew instinctively that I was open to it, that I was receptive to it. I became so compassionate toward other people, so loving. I felt my heart grow. In fact, I had a vision one time of my heart growing, starting way from deep within the earth and extending way up into the heavens. This big and wide, this big heart. I felt like I was just one heart. And so I was afraid. Someone said, well, aren't you afraid to be so vulnerable or to be so open? At that time, I wasn't. I mean, later I felt I had to close down, shut down, protect myself a little more. But during that time, I felt almost no judgment. I could sense the good in people. And there were so many intuitive things that happened to me during that time period. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I still haven't been able to process it all these years later.
Well, I feel like, first of all, when you said, maybe you could help me come up with the word, that what I heard was heart-centered. And you didn't even say the word heart until I heard that word heart-centered. And then you start, so we know intuitively. And this is the thing that I love about development. So even those labels, psychic, medium, intuition, whatever, honestly, I think that when we come into that space of care, forgiveness, empathy, compassion, kindness for ourselves and the world around us, we step into the fullness of our own light. We are one. And what happens is that intuition and that knowing are all simply symptoms of us connecting back to our innate energy that we came to this earth with, right? And so when those people, they don't probably even understand, or they're maybe not even registering why. Also, they just know that there's a light within you that is also with them. So you're reflecting to them their brightness.
Yes.
But you're brave enough to step into your own and not be afraid to shine it. And so life experiences, and you even talk about that in the book, through hardships and through some of those hard experiences that we've all moved through. We all have trauma that we I want to say we must heal through. But when we do that, it's very brave to step through that and then be able to open ourselves back up into that heart-centered space and share yet again. And that's what you're doing without even having to know. We don't have to know the logical side of these things. Sometimes it's perfect and important just to step into it.
Yeah. And something else you said that I forgot about when you said the thing about we are one. And I know people say that and you think, what does that really mean? At that time, I really did feel connected to everyone, so much so that I almost could see the connections, lines of connections between people. And it did feel like we were really all in this together. Rather than feeling the separations, the lines of separation. And that's why even in this world today of political separations and divisions, there are ways that we can be together even if we disagree with each other. So I think it's so important.
When we're in that heart-centered space, yeah, I agree with you. It is so important to say, and as soon as you said it, I'm thinking, yes, and you wrote this knowing what it's like to be a person of a different race, gender, age, political background, religion, socioeconomic circumstance, any of those differences, when we're heart-centered in the way that you have found to be, we don't even realize sometimes when we're in that space, but it's reflected in the world. And that, I believe, is why people want to come and share their thoughts, their mindsets, and all of that with us. Do you find that it's been like that your whole entire life?
I not to that degree my entire life. I would have to say no. Um, I can say that I was fortunate to have been born into a family with a mother who was very loving and very compassionate. And I know everyone doesn't have that, but I think it was when I was older that I started thinking, I wonder why. Sometimes you think, why this mother? Why this family? Why this hardship? Why? And when I started thinking about the things that I got from being in that environment, I said, okay, maybe it's my duty to actually give some of that back. So I had to practice it too, even though I grew up in this house with a mother who was loving and compassionate. The more I became loving, the more, that grew like a muscle too, and compassionate. So you don't have to, even if you're not in that environment, you can develop it, which is really important to say too, because some people think, oh, well, you've always been like that. No, I haven't, but
I even love your facial expression as you say it, because
there
even
was a time when I would have wanted revenge
yeah,
more than to be loving or kind or compassionate. So I just
which
have to be honest about that.
we're all human. We're here having this human experience. And that leads me to that first acronym, forgiveness,
Yeah.
right? Oh, do you find that that's sometimes the most
The biggest,
difficult?
the most difficult. Someone told me empathy is the most difficult, but for me, it's forgiveness because maybe because of my, okay, I'm just going to throw a little astrology in there, whether it has anything to do with it or not, maybe because of my Libra background with the scales of justice and liking things to be balanced and even when they're not. And when someone is taking advantage of someone, or also, I used to be a trial attorney. So I used to advocate for other people. And I did not like it when people were trying to take advantage of someone, in an unfair advantage, or if someone was being a bully or whatever. So there were times when maybe I thought revenge or vengeance or getting justice was more important than understanding or being forgiving or anything. But you know what? I I learned, I got knocked to my knees to ask for forgiveness over a thing that I was carrying around with me, injustice that I felt was just, it was eating away at me. And then I learned that the other person wasn't even thinking about it. Sometimes we're carrying around these things in our head, and forgiveness, Archbishop Desmond Tutu told me, you think you're forgiving for the other person, you're forgiving for you. You get rid of that weight on your shoulders. You feel you are allowing yourself to let the light and love come back into your heart and into your mind, into your life. And forgiveness really is, it's a biggie, it's hard to do. And sometimes it's not a once and done thing. Sometimes you forgive and you have to forgive again and forgive until it really is released, but it is worth it. Forgiveness is a biggie.
I love that first of all, you write about that in your book as well, that experience, right? And so I want you all to make sure that also with every one of your chapters, there's a place where you work through. It's like a workbook essentially. So
Yes,
you look and there's
yes.
a workbook in there for you. This isn't a book; it's to put you into the way of finding these things for you. And so that's what I want to encourage everybody listening to make sure you really get that and infuse this in your life. And I love what you just said. You said, forgiveness, it's not always like a one and done thing. I feel like, and so, yeah, right. It's an evolution as we evolve. Sometimes when those past hurts creep up yet again, I always
Yes.
say, take a breath in, but
Mhm.
sometimes it's coming up for us to see it through our healed eyes of today.
Yes, yes. And so at the end of each chapter, I have some exercises or some where you can do a little journaling and some specific exercises, especially with forgiveness, to bring in that person that you have this beef with to see if we can help start healing that.
And
And although I have to tell you too, I don't like writing in books, but this is written like with a workbook. So I'm hoping to do a separate workbook so that if someone else doesn't like writing in this book, they can have a workbook to do the exercises in.
get a good book and throw it to the side and wrap it with a rubber band or a beautiful ribbon or something maybe, but
Yeah.
or let's get that workbook into play. That's hilarious. To me, I think that a book well used should look like, you know, I have an old Bible that I love that my grandmother had given me with my name
Yeah.
engraved on it. And
Oh,
that sucker has, I've got, you know, all kinds of meaningful stuff in it. And
yes.
it's, you know, it's worn. And I kind of love it because we're all scarred in ways. So in a way, I think of that sometimes with these books, that they show the life that it has led.
Oh, I like that, thinking that way. Yes, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're like, I still may not write in that book, but you'll come
I'll
up with
put Post-it notes in.
good, good, good. That's exactly right. I love that. Well, so forgiveness. So, um, do you feel like that's the one that people struggle with the most, is really even just that first step of forgiveness? I love that it's the first, you know, acronym actually too.
Yes, it's the one that I've in talking to people, because I freely confess that it's the most difficult. It was the biggest one for me to grasp
Mhm.
for a while, and other people have been saying that too. Yeah,
I
and you know, some people say, "How can you forgive?" And it doesn't mean that you there are different steps to
We
it.
don't necessarily have to continue to engage in the energy. And so I believe that boundaries are, even energetic boundaries are, a beautiful thing. So it doesn't mean we have to put ourselves in that
Absolutely.
same thing, right? And
Mhm.
so the forgiveness can come with protection of ourselves, but we can still let it still be love that is sending that love to us and them rather than angst.
And there have been situations where, in talking with someone who that you are forgiving, and you see that they have had remorse, that they are so grateful that you've come and they say, you know what, I really didn't mean it that way, and let's be friends. And sometimes it can foster a stronger relationship between people. So
I have found that in my relationships, if I cannot be honest and truthful, and that also I give them the same space. So if I have hurt your feelings, it's
yeah.
not ever the intention. And but if they assume that it is, or like, we have to have that clarity, because I can feel, I always say that I can feel the said and the unsaid. So when we don't say those things, I believe that it becomes like a barrier between the relationship, whether it's your husband, your partner, your best friend, your child, whatever. When we do that, to so I think working through these steps that you line in the book can be so important to really have very close friendships with those around us, and then that
Yeah.
friendship with ourselves too. It's so important. What about compassion? What about compassion?
So compassion is the feeling that you get when you have when you have put yourself in the shoes of another person, and
Mm.
when you see their challenges or obstacles or pain, and you start developing a feeling that you want to help alleviate that pain, that's what I call compassion. And you know, sometimes it's you know, I'm going to use a simple
Yeah.
example. Sometimes you're watching television and you hear about a school where the kids, you know, it's already a school where there's kids don't have a lot of money, but maybe someone broke in and stole you know, the band instruments or something. And you think, and you put yourself in those, and those kids were supposed to go off on a trip to Washington, D.C., but now they have no instruments. And you think, oh, if I were in that situation, what would I do? Oh, I just go buy it. Oh, but those kids, their parents can't afford it. And then, there becomes a compassion. You want to help alleviate. And so the act of kindness is maybe donating money. That's just something that is kind of a through line of from empathy to compassion to kindness. And there are many other examples, but I just wanted to use that because that's something that happens frequently. And
I think that's a beautiful example too. And so what I hear through that is also sometimes we might have that insight of action. And so whether it might not be even a huge step of action where you're coming through and purchasing those things for the children, but maybe even starting, what do they have, those GoFundMe
a
or whatever,
GoFundMe
you know,
contributing, yes.
yeah, you if you feel compelled to maybe step in that and I like how, again, forgiveness, empathy, we kind of did empathy first, but forgiveness, empathy, and then that compassion and that kindness. I believe that, if everybody started to really come from that heart-centered space and step into all of these different emotions, feelings, and start taking the action towards that, what a different world we would live in.
What a different, you know what, even, okay, now you got me feeling it. I felt that when you said it because it raises the vibration. It does. It can't help but raise the vibration of things. And that's one of the things that my mom taught me about walking into a room. She said, sometimes my mother was an intuitive and she was a spiritualist, a minister in the spiritualist church. And she would say, look, simple thing. It's funny that she talked to my daughter, Sonia, about this stuff more than she talked to me. But one of the things that she would tell us is when you walk into a room, she said, there are things, feel the temperature of the room, feel the vibrations, feel the emotion, the emotional temperature. Are you walking into a space that feels safe? Are you walking into a space that feels welcoming? Are you walking into a space that feels angry or whatever? Go in and see and do what you can do to help change the vibration of that room. And so I we thought as like, what? No, we can't do that. But now I understand. I've had some life experiences. And so I understand what she means. And so what you said, that I immediately started thinking about situations recently
Mm.
where people were at odds, and you step in to do or say something to help relieve it and to,
We show up in that heart-centered space that you were rough, that space, and it there I believe, and some can disagree, but when we bring forth a higher frequency of energy,
yeah,
it can't hold negative necessarily, and that higher frequency, something's got to give, and that higher
yeah.
frequency, that heart-centered beautiful space is going to win every time. First of all, I do know your beautiful daughter Sonia. I love her very much. She's so amazing. And my father was very much like your mother,
Mm,
always telling me, and I know that that's where my ownership of the energy that I can see and can't see, that I trust it. And it's because of, teachings like
yeah.
that your mother taught her. I'm sure she was teaching you, and even just by you witnessing her stepping into that energy. I want to ask you a question. Though, was it, you've been, first of all, you've been an amazing trial attorney. We could go on with the list of accomplishments. Very much of this being left brain analytical, the smarts, the all of that, right? And you're then in this amazing world of film and Hollywood and all of this, this big life that you've created and continue to embark in. And knowing you and knowing that energy, was it uncomfortable, or did it feel really um, vulnerable to step into really claiming the energy behind this book? Was it vulnerable for you?
Okay, very, very vulnerable. There were times when the book was written and I wasn't going to put it out. I wasn't going to publish it. Who am I to put out a book about asking people to be kinder or more compassionate. Who's going to listen to me? I didn't want to come off as holier than thou, because that's not the intent at all. And then I think Spirit kind of pushed me a little bit, like, no, it's, you have every right to do it. And people will accept it in that spirit, because that's so. Yes, it is. It is difficult to be vulnerable and to put yourself out there. But I know that I get so much when I read other people's books, or when I hear of other people's challenges and how they overcome them. And I know that I get so much from what other people, when they let me in to their lives. So I'm hoping that by me letting people into my life, that it helps as well.
What I really appreciate you saying, and those of you listening to this podcast, it feels so emotional just to even hear you witness and say, who am I to share? Who am I to do? I hear that from so many clients, every week, every day, that have this big heart-centered space of connection. And they might not even know how they want to share. They don't have the end, of what that even looks like. They know they want to create something. They want to know they want to step into something that feels so natural and beautiful, that just flows through them so effortlessly. And they too get very nervous about putting that work out there. And
Yes.
then we get lost in that, what is that, imposter syndrome. And I want to say that it's so beautiful. And I thank you for saying that, because with all of your amazing accomplishments, and it doesn't matter how much work or how much wisdom sometimes that we have, it still can feel very vulnerable to just step out and show another piece of who we are. And so I pray that that comment that you just made encourages everybody to move through that fear and show up.
And so I have to, part of it is not so much imposter syndrome, but letting people know, because I was a lawyer, and did so many things that were, let's say, fact-based, science-based. Maybe I didn't want to share that part of me that was so heart-based. And so, not being an imposter, but letting people know that that is also a big part of me. And
It's such a huge,
being vulnerable to, like, oh, okay.
well, to the emotion behind it. And so I I remember stepping out. I love science. I like proof. I like facts. I want
Yes.
confirmed validation. It took me a long time to step into my gifts. I worked for a neurofeedback company for many years, which is the only reason I was then able, because you could see it on the brain mapping. I worked with
Yes.
psychologists and quantum physicists from around the world, but I needed that proof. And so I love that you share that, because you have a lot of, just like your mother, and I'm going to call it out. I hope that's okay. But there's a lot of intuition within you, and there's a lot of connection, spirituality that I think when we start to open that up to the world, it does feel essentially like coming out of the closet, does it not?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So what is your prayer, your hope that people find through reading this amazing book, this amazing gift that you've moved through?
I'm going to tell you about a dream that I have frequently. So I have this dream, and it that I go to this town, and as I'm walking through the town, I'm communicating with people without speaking. They're communicating with me. And as I walk past, like, there's this guy in a white shirt, and I can feel the depth of his goodness, the depth of his kindness. And I walk past someone else, and without speaking, I know, I look, and it's this town where people have sort of absorb these principles, and they're living them, and they're feeling them, and you can sense them without even talking about them. And so it's not that I think that the world is going to become a town where we can just sense goodness without talking about it, but I do think that there is a place where we start feeling the goodness of others and that vulnerability, and it becomes a natural thing. It becomes natural. And it does become something that as we walk, almost every other person that we pass, we can feel it and we know that there's goodness there, that there's kindness there, there's compassion there. And we start feeling empathy for each other. I mean, I think about this day during the pandemic when I stepped out. I live in Chicago, and I walked out on the street, and this is when everything was shut down. And I've talked about this before, but there were no cars on the street. People weren't going anywhere. There were coyotes in the middle of the city, coyotes on the street. Not a lot, but and I said, wait a minute. If a coronavirus can go viral and shut down the whole world, why not something like goodness becoming viral? What can we do to make compassion become viral? What can we do to make empathy become viral? How can we start forgiving each other and maybe thinking that what a person did was not intentional? How can we forgive and lift that weight? How can we open our hearts and let more light and more love in? And how can we reflect and shine that love and light back out to another person? Because in this dream that I keep having, that's the other thing. As I'm walking through this town, I'm thinking, I'm shining my light, and your light is shining on me. And I feel it and I reflect it. And I do think I did an experiment, Courtney. This is going to sound a little crazy. I did an experiment one day where I was walking through the airport, and I didn't say a word to anyone. I envisioned that the sun was inside me and I was beaming it out. And everybody that I looked at, I was sending out love and very positive thoughts to them. Do you know, through the airport, you could feel it. There was some energy bubble that was created, and people started reflecting it back, not just because you're smiling, but there's something really beaming positive, non-judgmental thoughts out and getting it back from people. So I do that experiment periodically sometimes. And I do think it makes a difference.
You say it and I start to have a tear in my eye. It starts to feel emotional because it's so pure. And to know, I know that I do this. And to me, when we do that, that golden light, I consider that, call it God, source, universe. And that is, we're all connected in that space. And so that is I also call it a knowing without knowing how we know, right? And so there is such a telepathic energy. So that dream, thank you for sharing that dream, and also understanding that that's also what you're putting out into the world. And so when we do that, it is so felt, and it does make a difference into our families, the world, our neighbors, the people at the airport, and us conducting our own beautiful science experiments like that. Be a skeptic even about it. I've lived a life of my everyday being my development class. And so if we can do that in those little moments, you're discovering and connecting back to what you know to be true. And what you know to be true is that works and that's felt. And so thank you for sharing that. It made me emotional, because also to know that there are other people like yourself, like myself, and like I'm sure many others that are just simply walking through their everyday life, sending and exuding that kind of light is so heartwarming. And so I want to just say thank you for that, Chaz. That's a beautiful thing. Anything that you want to leave us with today? Any type of message that you want to leave for anybody that is listening, who is trying to find this for themselves and wanting to really step into this process of evolution of their soul, because that's essentially what I see you giving as a guide. It's helping them find that core connection with themselves. Anything you want to leave?
I would just say be kind, and also you are loved. You are loved. You are loved. You're worthy of it. You're capable of it. You deserve it. And you are loved.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Chaz. I want to say that your mother, she is so proud of you and this legacy you're leaving behind for your family and generations to come. I know that when we connect to this higher frequency of work, that it's not just helping you and yours today, but it's helping those grandchildren's 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 grandchildren. And I so appreciate you stepping into that. Where can we find your book, Chaz? I know that for anybody listening under this beautiful podcast, you're going to be able to find a link that will
Yes.
tell people to find that. But where are some other places we can find you?
So you can go to Amazon to buy It's Time to Give a Feck, or you can go to there's a website for the book called giveafeck.com, GIVEAFECK.com. And Simon and Schuster is the distributor, so
I love
they
that.
also have it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaz, so much for
Thank
being.
you, Courtney, for having
Absolutely.
me.
Absolutely. Anytime. I'm gonna actually see if maybe I can get you to join me on an Instagram live or something. What fun conversations and discussions. So I so appreciate you being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you.